Technology guarantees a faster network, better performance, as well as the delivery of worldwide connectivity. While taking data network to every citizen remains a priority for telecom operators in India, they are also working towards rapidly transforming, driving innovation across sectors, including automobile, healthcare, and energy. That's to name just a few sectors in India. Telecom companies, on their part, are looking at leveraging new cloud-based technologies, including the likes of SDN, NFV, along with newer technologies such as carrier aggregation and massive MIMO to deliver superior services, something we heard about just a short while ago earlier this afternoon. Our second panel today will discuss the Indian telecom industry's digital transformation strategies as well as network technologies. I would like to invite up on stage, first and foremost, the National Head, Strategy and Market and leader of the TMT practice at KPMG, Mrutyunjay Kapoor. If I can request you to come up on stage to moderate the panel this afternoon. A round of applause from Mrutyunjay as he comes up to moderate this panel. I'm going to now invite up on stage our panelists, and as I call your name, could I request that you come up on stage and do keep the applause going for our second panel this afternoon. Next up, could I please call up on stage the Global CIO of Bharti Airtel, Harmeen Mehta. Harmeen, if we can please have you up on stage. Could I now call the CIO of Vodafone India, Meenakshi Vajpayee. Could we please have you up on stage, Meenakshi? Next up, could I kindly request the CTO of Huawei India, Radhe Shyam Sarda, to join us on stage for this panel discussion. Please. Can I also call upon the Vice President DevOps and Infrastructure of Nokia Software, Nokia, Mac Verdi, to please join us on stage and join this panel discussion. And do keep the applause going, ladies and gentlemen, as I call up on stage next the CMO of Indus Towers, Shankar Iyer, to join the other panelists on stage. Over to you, Mrutyunjay.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I think just to kick it off, Mr. Sharma said a great statement wherein he likened the telcos to a digital platform which is there for all industries. And I think as the telcos start moving towards providing higher speeds, better services, I think there's also a move towards optimizing the networks, be it through the latest technologies that are available. And that's why this entire discussion on virtualization, on cloud-based networks. So just to start, I think we've got a great panel. It's a fairly bold panel, as one of the panelists said. We've got two CIOs, we've got network operators out here, and of course we've got somebody from the infrastructure services provider for the industry. Now, just to start, and when you look at virtualization of networks, of course the application layer and the infrastructure layer has gotten separated. It also means that the IT departments and the network departments within a telco start coming together, which is somewhat a change in how traditionally they operate. So Meenakshi, maybe I could start with you and to get your views around how that is working.
So as I was saying, we live in interesting times, and as the conversations between network and IT go, and I go back several years when I started my telco career, from there to today, the language is changing, and that is an indication of how the line between network and IT in a telco, which is about the only industry where technology has two parts rather than just one technology department, the line seems to be blurring. The language that we kind of hear the people in network side now talking are hardware versus software, virtualization, operating systems, which are traditionally the lingo of the IT people. And it shows that, as the network equipment is getting commoditized, as network equipments are going towards open source, where again IT has been foraying there for some time, And as network tries to drive efficiencies by using this kind of hardware and software, it's kind of coming closer to the technology that I, as an IT professional, is more used to. Therefore, the opportunity there is that we have an infrastructure layer or a hardware layer and network layer, and we have a software layer, which is again traditional IT way of dividing the solutions that we provide. And the bigger opportunity is, can we have now conversations about a common infrastructure team? And we are experimenting with that. If there is no difference between what an NFV can do versus what a virtualized cloud, a private cloud can do, albeit there is a difference about what the IaaS patterns can be in network versus in IT, but they are patterns at the end of the day, if I stretch my imagination a little bit. But the opportunity for us to explore the commonality between what is happening in network infrastructure and what IT data centers are building in terms of their private clouds is definitely there. And so I repeat, we live in interesting times.
And as you sort of touch upon that in terms of what's happening in your organization, also is digitization, is this entire move toward virtualization really impacting the customer? Is it really impacting it in terms of creating an omni-channel experience? How does it really work when you look at the customer? I mean, inwards, yes, the departments are moving together, but what about the customers?
I think there is still, I actually feel that the entire world, if you look at especially in the technology world today, it's a world of specialization. And I think even between the network and the engineering side, there are a lot of different specializations which will always continue to exist whether the departments are together or not. And I think, in fact, if anything, engineering is moving far more towards closer to the customer and much more towards the digital world, and that is a very different skill set altogether. I think if digitization in any of the organizations is not about the customer, then the company is actually missing a point. It has to start with the customer, and not just, the customer can't be just an afterfact of it. The entire concept of what is omni-channel? Omni-channel is when the customer interacts with the brand. If they're interacting with Airtel, they interact with Airtel as one entity and as one brand. It doesn't matter whether they're standing in a physical store, on the online store, or calling a call center, or actually using the app. They want an absolutely seamless experience. And the world is moving towards where you could start a journey in one channel and finish it in another, and you're expected as a company to understand that this is the same customer and that's how I'm going to interact with them. That's only possible through a digital layer. It's not possible through any of the other traditional mechanisms, because we all belong to companies where tech has been built over the course of the last couple of decades, and we all have legacies to deal with. Unless, of course, you are a brand new shiny operator, then you don't have a legacy. But I think this is where the power of the new digital thinking and a more disruptive thinking and thinking out of the box on how to solve the same traditional problem but differently comes into the picture. And digitization is truly allowing to bind the customer and bind a unilateral experience across all channels for the consumer, actually to make their lives better and to make their experience on our company and our network a lot better as well. Plus, I think the biggest power that I feel, at least what we focused on in our digital strategy, is to understand both the needs of the customer and the future needs of the customer, and seeing how you can digitize that and bring that over to them. But more importantly, also taking the advantage of predicting and understanding and auto-resolving a consumer's point. Why should, if there's a problem, if I have a problem on my network, I should go back to the customers and say, sorry guys, I'm feeling a bit of a disruption here. It'll take us 30 minutes, it'll get resolved. And at the same point, if I found out that something has gone wrong for this particular customer, they'd asked something but it hasn't worked, we should proactively go and fix it. Why should he or she, she have to call a call center or have that audio to go through? And it's, given the scale of this industry in our country, it's going to take a little bit of time till you build these solutions and scale them up to work for 350 million people. But at the same point, I think that's the direction we've got to think through. So I actually believe the entire digital strategies have to be consumer first. It starts from the consumer, what their needs are, what their problems are, and it should be about solving those and then moving more towards inwards. And at least that's definitely the focus. And I head digital as well at Airtel, so that's very much the focus that we've brought in.
Great. So inward, you know, you've got two teams coming together. Of course, customer focus absolutely right at the forefront. And of course, coming to you, Radhe, how do you make this all happen? So as an OEM, what's really the strategy to help the telcos through this entire digitization journey? Because end of the day, it's all going to rest on you.
Yeah, sure. So as Harmin mentioned that, of course, customer experience and business stays to be one of or two of the key, driving force behind digital transformation. In past, if we see, as we move from voice to data era or in a way from 2G to 3G and 4G, we transformed the network from TDM to all IP. But now, as we move towards digital and 5G, we focus on all cloud strategy. So basically, we have been focusing on all cloud strategy since past few years. And we have been working on an advanced end-to-end all cloud network architecture, which we call as Softcom. So the idea behind all cloud strategy is to bring agility and flexibility in the network through use of technologies like SDN and NFV, bring operational efficiency through AI and machine learning and so on, and also enable new business through ecosystem and platform strategy. And the whole idea here is to basically bring all these new technologies to make the network more powerful, flexible, and agile so that it can equip the network with forward compatible digital capabilities so that the network can support the newer services which we are looking forward to, as well as some services which we have not envisaged so far, but the future will unveil many new services as we enter into the 5G era. So the network need to be able to support the new services of future, be able to enable new business model, and at the center of it, it should be able to support the customer experience. That is the key idea behind which we are working, and we call it all cloud strategy. And we think that this all cloud strategy would help our customers to undergo digital transformation as we move ahead.
Great. So Mac, over to you, and what's the global experience?
Well, it's a unique point in inflection that we are looking at. So globally, looking at where different markets are and where they're coming from, we have different experiences. So as my colleagues touched on earlier, I think it depends on where you have been in the market and what you've been playing with. We have new web scale companies that are not dealing with the legacy infrastructure problems, but that also doesn't have touch points to gain to do these things. So as with DevOps that is coming, and I'm glad that I see two CIOs on the panel. I've been noticing in the last 3-4 years, I'm talking much more with CIOs in companies than actually the operations part of the house. Because DevOps is an area of where you're trying to bring the digitalization and that experience to the customer. As was said earlier about customer experience and the digital experience of the customer, as well as the digital intelligence of how do you look at that customer and provide it through the omni-channel. DevOps is a tool that allows you to bring that relationship closer. So it's not just closer with vendors and OEMs and their customers, but the end customer and the end experience. So in terms of the global market, I think we have a variety of different ways of where it's doing depending on where the technology is. But I think the key point here is within the Indian market, a lot of stuff has been changing quite rapidly in the last 5 years, and they've evolved to things like SDN and NFV, and these things are being consumed at different rates. There are some key players that you hear about quite frequently have talked about their strategies. Somewhere they're looking at about 75% of their investment is going to be in this space next year versus traditional infrastructure. And the only way you can get there quickly is doing the digitalization that was mentioned earlier, and having DevOps, automation, open source, these are all key things to doing that, to bringing that relationship closer.
Maybe if I can just ask another point. So where are we compared to some of the mature markets in this entire journey of digitization?
Sure. So I think, again, I think where we are is that I look at what the branding is of how we use the different things from the end consumer. So as someone who's from the North American market myself, as both a consumer and someone that works there, I'm quite surprised at some of the things that are being offered as end-to-end things. The web scale companies have made a lot of noise, and by web scale, the Google, the Facebook, the Netflix of the worlds. They're challenging the traditional telco players. But in India, I'm seeing that you're having these two markets come together and that you have the ability with the content to fuse these together. So I think you have a unique opportunity with having both the content and the licensing ability and the end customer to combine these. And I think that's a unique opportunity that's in India that's not necessarily in the other markets globally.
Thanks. So Shankar, over to you. I think we've spoken about cloud, we've spoken about the efficiencies that we get internally, and also the entire customer focus, and then of course the unique position India is. So now maybe we've got to come down to earth from the cloud to say, how does it all work basis the infrastructure that exists today?
So when you talk about down to earth, today we are happy to have CIOs sitting in this dais. 20 years back, the CTOs used to come and say, hey guys, why don't you put up a 70-meter tower for us, where we want to give a real good coverage to X kilometer of area. Today, over the last 2 decades, I would say the industry has put close to about 500,000 tower locations across the country. These 500,000 locations are actually giving the coverage as well as the capacity what was required for the technology evolution thus far which have reached. The next decade is really going to be a big challenge for all of us when we talk about digitization. All of us, we're talking about all the artificial intelligence and the machine learnings, etc. That 70-meter is suddenly coming down to the street. That street, the average height, we heard Dr. Sharma talking about the vertical to horizontal. Actually, we are going to be experiencing the horizontal move of the street furniture, which is going to be utilized for bringing far superior coverage, far superior speed, and the network agility. That network agility is going to make these CIOs to give consumer experience much more than yesteryears.
So the other buzzword is digitization, and I think if we go around the room, everybody will have a different definition. Some really close, some far apart. But Meenakshi, how do you envision digitization in telcos, and what really is the imperative?
So, I wish I could say it is one thing that's driving this whole upheaval that's being created in all our lives. But I would like to start where Harmeen started, and I totally agree with her, is at the end of the day, what is it that the customer wants and what is it that we are trying to give to the customer? Everything starts from there. Having said that, over the past few years, and even before that actually, the technologies we are talking about today, which are foremost in our thought process, and just to tick off my finger, the buzzwords like SMAC, social mobile analytics cloud, we're talking about, and digitization is actually encompassing all of these. So I can't say that, I'll go and address efficiencies through virtualization and through the building of a cloud and not do mobile, for example, because mobile is what gives me the reach. So if we are trying to, and on the other side, we are also talking about, things changing in the market. We are talking about data volumes going up. The networks are perpetually choked, as well as the revenues or the ARPUs going the downward trend. How do we address this? ARPUs have always been challenging in India, but never more so. What else is changing? The customer is changing. What customer expected from us a couple of years ago, the expectation doesn't remain the same. The customer says, why does omnichannel become so important for us? Because the customer says, I want the service at the place that I am. I don't want to come to your store for the service. I want the service on the device that I want to consume it on. You won't dictate to me where I go to consume the service. And I want the service in the manner that I prefer it to. And therefore, the personalization aspect also comes to the fore. So customer has always been demanding, but the demand is undergoing a change. I spoke about the environment. What else is changing? IT itself is undergoing a huge change with all of these different technologies that I talked about. And they are all coming together in one way or the other. On the one hand, because we are addressing the output challenges, efficiencies have to be built. The other hand, when we have to address the customer requirement, agility needs to be built in, which is where DevOps come in as an operating model. So I would say, in a nutshell, digitization is an amalgamation of all these technologies, all these intents for the customer that we want to build, as well as the operating model that has been spoken about.
No, and I pick on the point that the customer is demanding and really doesn't want to pay. And that's where digitization probably comes in. And Harmeen, since you're heading that in Bharti, and I also, you wrote something about the innovation labs. So what's your view on the use cases that are there? Where does this really take us in terms of, what next for the customer, what next for the operator in terms of use cases, and also in terms of margins and revenues?
Well, margins and revenues are declining faster than you can drop a penny. So the use cases better start increasing in equal proportion, because we're all going to need to find different ways of creating monetization opportunities for ourselves. But I think, again, if I keep the customer at the heart of it, it is really about understanding how our lives are changing. And what is our expectation from today's world and tomorrow's world as we live through our day-to-day life. Telecommunications is one of the biggest enablers in life, but there are many things that it enables. And it's really about we are the glue that binds, a day together. And all the use cases are what would emerge actually from that. If we're talking about the future of, what IoT brings, etc., it's not just about a fringe case of leveraging IoT in a manufacturing plant and seeing are my machines running fine. It's going to become an everyday phenomenon where actually my fridge is telling me that this is what my health is and this is what you've got inside and these are the only 2 things you can cook today. Or it is, the ease with which I forget to turn off the gas or turn off the lights and I don't have to go back, 20 kilometers in the Gurgaon traffic and literally from the palm of my hands I can turn that off. These are becoming, what today feels that it'll be a nice to have. It's similar to the mobile phone. It was a nice to have maybe a decade ago. It's as essential as breathing today. And these are the things where they are going to become essential to our lives and how we live through a day. These are not things that we're going to want to be thinking about. And similarly, if I look at a lot of the companies and real world problems, if we were to just take problems that either a consumer has or the world has today, shortage of water, of electricity, the amount of energy that we waste as individuals. I mean, even if we can find a way of just conserving that, not just necessarily about, if I have to pay 500 rupees lesser in my electricity bill, it's not going to make me any richer. But it might actually elongate how long people can live on this planet. It might actually completely change 100 years of how Earth is going to survive. These are things we don't think about today, but essentially with everything that's happening around us, they are going to become a real world problem in a few years. And if we keep that lens, it will keep us grounded, more relevant, and make sure that we are coming up with the right use cases and using technology to solve the right problems and not just for the sake of technology. That's really no fun. At the end of the day, it's when you've achieved something and you've either solved a business problem, a consumer problem, industry problem, a country problem. That's what it should be all about. And I think this is where if I, don't have a crystal ball, but if I did and if I were to look into it, I think these are some of the use cases, and especially seeing that today the amount of information that we have, the amount of things that we see churn through in our network, how we can use true power of deep learning and deep science to actually get some more meaningful and relevant patterns out of it that can really change either how our B2B and enterprise customers work and how they can benefit their consumers further, or how we can make the lives of our consumers definitely better. Even if I look in the network scenario, and as we are digitizing our networks as well, our ability to be able to, the network, the telecom industries, we heard Mr. Sharma say as well, India is one of the most predominant telecom and, operators in the world, and the deepest penetration of in the industry as well. Just keeping that in mind, the amount of data that it takes to that we churn just out of our network, and to keep it running. If we were to just be able to mine that and automatically tune on the fly the network to be able to cope and provide the best experience possible at that moment in time, despite the fact that 20 sites might be going through a problem, but you're still able to service the customer because you've just optimized and self-optimized the network. I mean, that's what's going to change the consumer's life. The consumer is not interested whether Airtel is on the cloud and using DevOps or not, but these are things that make our lives easier and allow us to do things that maybe traditional technologies could not allow us to do things. It's much more about that what you do with the power of these fabulous tools. And I run more than 60% of engineering in Airtel actually runs on the cloud. Now, that's not what the consumer is actually excited about. What he's excited about is when we run a campaign, and when we did Open Network as an example, the amount of traffic that we had was almost 200 times. We didn't see a single outage because our cloud allowed us to auto-scale. It actually started shutting down all the dev environments because it was scaling 200 times. And no matter how much capacity you build, you can never build to that capacity. The traffic went off. It went back to normal size. Nobody's life got impacted. But it would allow us to service our consumers in a way that would have not been possible with traditional technology. But that's what the consumer sees. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what it should be about.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the great example in terms of how practically it works, and also the fact that the use cases actually are, the problems that telcos actually will end up solving. And I think Mac, going back to DevOps and SDN, I think the key around that is how fast can you develop? How fast can the R&D happen, considering that the environment is completely changed and you're responding real time? So what's your view, when you look at DevOps in that light with the new cloud infrastructure?
Sure. So it is a very relevant point, and I think as vendors working together with our partners to provide that digital experience that we talked about, we have to think of things in digital time. So it's not just digitalization, but it's moving in digital speed, right? And what we mean by that is the ability to adapt quickly and move to different conditions. So, I heard the example of getting up early in the morning and having to get out there and deal with traffic. Well, a lot of people now in the IT space have smart devices. Some of you are using smart devices as watches to set your alarms. Wouldn't it be great if we could mine the data of the traffic that's already out there and take that experience and maybe realize that today there's more congestion, so I need to set that alarm to wake up earlier, and having that type of thing, and maybe providing that alert to the end person. Now, as an end consumer, you think, well, that's great. I found out I have to get up a little early to make that important meeting. But in order to do that, you have to enable all these systems to connect together. You have to have the ability to have them redefine themselves. So if you're in the traditional way of having different silos and having closed systems and closed abilities to build that up, you don't have that. But when you are having a digitalization layer, back to the comment earlier about having SDN networks that can think this way and having the openness to share and sort of wow the end person at the end, they won't see all the things that happen in the background. But in order to enable that ability to do that type of sharing, you must have these types of things and tools. So yes, to an end consumer, tools aren't the cool thing to do, but they are the technology that enables us. And it also is a new way where the self-learnings that we do, when we have in education, the ability to have this stuff and share those experiences with others is what allows us to do that. So it's really a new trend of both digitization and digital time and that concept to move fast.
So, Shankar, over to you in terms of all this development, cloud, digital, new technology, what happens to the towers? How do you gear up for all of this? And is there digitization, virtualization in your life as well?
Absolutely. In fact, if you look at from our own industry and the fraternity, as I mentioned, today's 500,000 tower locations, if you need to connect first of all, our own employees, our own direct, indirect employees who work in the organization. I think this fraternity has nothing less than 100,000 people working. This 500,000 sites are connected. It is a distributed asset. It is connected through alarms. Okay, 5 million alarms are running always 24/7. These alarms itself is like a massive IoT. That massive IoT, if you're able to try and bring the outage, whatever, or the SLAs which we need to deliver to our customers as B2B and then the B2C, if you're able to look at the chain and reduce the outage, we're able to succeed and give the satisfaction to the end consumer to have that speed, to have that agility, and then making sure that the customer experience happens better.
So, even before the IoT word was coined, I think the tower industry had these devices to measure diesel in the gensets. So, really, that was one innovation that came out of India quite strongly. So, Radhe, moving on to 5G and the technology solutions behind that. So, what are you bringing into India? What do you see across the world? What really does? What are the solutions for us to take us into the next, generation of telecom services?
Sure. So if we look back in past 1 year, of course, 4G, if we see already, it has seen data explosion. In last 1 year, data traffic in Indian networks have increased about more than 10 times. But if we look at 4G, 4G is mainly addressing mobile broadband type of services. In the context of 5G, 5G is a very paradigm shift from 4G. So in 5G, we plan to address long tail of services, which pose very different requirements, and we need to support all of these services on the same network. So the services have varying SLA requirements. Some services require very massive throughput. Some services require ultra reliable and low latency kind of character. And certain services like massive IoT would definitely need massive number of connections to be supported in the same network. So going back, I talked about all cloud strategy earlier. We need to have a network which can support agility and flexibility, and it has to be very, very powerful. So in a way, we can say that from a network perspective, the network transformation, which is part of digital transformation, 5G is a part of it. Now, coming back to India market related aspects, I would like to mention that spectrum indeed is a challenge that we talked in the pre-lunch sessions also. And when we talk about 5G, 5G is initially expected to happen in high band, for example, in 3.5 gigahertz band. And if we look at the coverage in C-band, it's pretty less, especially from an uplink perspective. So if we have to, in a traditional sense, deploy 3.5 gigahertz base stations and cover India, it would probably require more than 3 times the number of base stations that we have today from a coverage perspective, considering the traditional bands. So we think that we need to be here very innovative. And earlier I talked about all cloud strategy, which is not limited to one or the other part of network. We are indeed taking even the air interface, the radio access part of the technology, air interface resources, spectrum, and even applying cloud technologies to it and taking benefit out of it. So one solution that we have been doing is basically doing dynamic sharing of spectrum between the technologies. We have already deployed this solution in leading operator networks in India. And then we took this concept into 3GPP and we basically put it into standards, which is going to be part of 5G standards. And we are even taking it forward by decoupling the uplink and the downlink. Uplink is from mobile to the network and downlink is from network to the mobile. So generally speaking, the uplink coverage is less compared to downlink. What we are doing is we are taking the low band uplink and pairing it with high band downlink. In this way, we are able to extend the coverage of C-band by pairing it with, let's say, another low band, such as 1800 megahertz. So instead of having a hotspot type of coverage, if we do 1:1 co-site with 1800 megahertz band, between C-band and 1800 megahertz, traditionally, C-band will form a hotspot kind of a coverage. It will not be a contiguous coverage. But with these new technologies, we'll be able to create a very contiguous coverage. That's a very relevant technology for India market. Second key aspect I want to talk about, also in pre-lunch session, it was talked about the massive MIMO. So massive MIMO can actually increase the spectrum utilization efficiency by anywhere between 3 to 5 times, and that becomes very critical. especially because we are seeing a massive data explosion. So we need to be able to support more capacity within the limited spectrum that we have. And here, massive MIMO will help us to reduce the cost per GB of the data that network is producing. So these are two key aspects from a wireless perspective. Aside, I would like to also touch upon the backhaul side. In India, we have a lack of fiber penetration, especially till the last mile. So while it is desired to have fiber to every site, but it will take time. So in the interim, we also need to be able to support the 5G sites with strong backhaul. And we should deploy sort of 5G ready backhaul, which would be powered by E-band microwave and so on and so forth. And then, of course, our colleagues already talked about the SDN and FV. They become very important part of the 5G network because that will give the agility and flexibility in 5G network. We also need to leverage the artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to improve the operational efficiency in a 5G network. So in a way, we can look at the fact that from a network transformation perspective, 5G and network transformation for digital transformation will basically go hand in hand, and this will help us to basically build a powerful network for 5G as we go ahead in India market.
So just before we close, I think 1 minute from all of you. Harmeen, starting with you, any specific use cases that you're working on with respect to 5G?
If I told you, I'd have to kill you. So I think that there are lots of use cases that are going to come from it, and I think especially if you look at the autonomous cars as well as specific use cases that will come from the network slicing side of thing and IoT, etc. They could be really really unique, especially in the health industry as well. Remote surgery is something that would not be possible unless we had technology like that. I think the first piece is really seeing through some of these use cases, because it's not just about the network, it's about the full ecosystem and getting that ready as 5G comes for those use cases to be actually realized as well. And I think we've got a long way to go, and even if we go by the news we just saw this morning about a person being killed by the autonomous car last night, I mean, I think those are kind of things that normally would not happen. With human drivers, they say that's 100 million kilometers to one death, and we've seen one death with just a few cars. So I think some of those things are, the whole ecosystem has to evolve together for them to really be realized. And I really hope, 5G cannot be just about fastest speeds and yet another fastest speeds, because I think we're just about capping that out. It has to be something meaningful that really changes the way we live and the way we work. And I think it's really about finding those real nuggets and making them work. And I think we've got some really great starts, and looking and collaborating with some of the people who are doing similar innovation and R&D around the world. Those are some of the ones that comes to mind, and rest, I think it's really about an entire ecosystem and different partnerships coming together to really go and make them happen. That's what it's going to be about. I think 5G is really going to bring a lot of the industries together with telecommunications. That's what's going to be quite different as well.
So Mac, what's the transition time? How long will the telcos take to move really to the cloud, to virtualization?
So I think it's obviously been a journey that they've started. Some are starting sooner than others. I think back to what we said earlier about this change that's been going on. It's really a concept of what you call traditional telcos, what you call traditional web scale companies, and also within the own telcos themselves, you're seeing organizations come together. You're seeing that the marketing and the CIO or the IT departments are really pushing the telcos to move into this digital footprint and do that. And the only way you can really do that is leveraging all of the strengths and different things. You can't just do that with more people, more equipment. You have to do it smarter and think and have self-learning networks that can do this type of stuff. How that's done, as was mentioned earlier, artificial intelligence is a very key thing. But it's not just the intelligence, it's having the data to be able to do it, to react to it and do that. It's areas we've been working on quite a bit with the different things and partnering with different players. So leveraging all these different things together and having the open interfaces to do it between the platforms is what will allow you to do that.
But will you put a time to it?
I think we're already seeing some places where it's happened in the global economies, and really I think it's these web-scale companies that have really forced the telcos to make this change. So if they're not going to do it soon enough, they will not be there. And I think that's the key message. But they are moving.
So Shankar, fiberization of towers and ROW.
So, interesting. The next set of 5 to 10 years, how are we able to bring the backhaul and the entire works of that backhaul when I was talking about the street furniture, how fast we're able to put that infrastructure ahead of the curve than before getting the technology. So if 5G is coming out, if I have to say the 90s, we were bringing technology. The last 1 decade, we've been running to put together the infrastructure. The next decade we should be putting the infrastructure and have the readiness for 5G to come in. That's the way I would say. Having said that, the key to get this backhaul, we are definitely happy that there are the ROW permissions are there. From some of the states have already started. We also need the blessings from the central agencies which can make it much better for especially the IP1 license holders like us. That will mean that we are able to bring faster the rollout and then cater to the...
So Meenakshi, AI, machine learning. What's the real story in the telcos?
It's real. Even though there's so much hype around that, and many people believe that it is not real, but we have to look at it from a lens which is more holistic. It's not something which will make my coffee for me, definitely. But we need to start at the bottom, and then we need to work our way up. I was sitting in a seminar panel, and one of my co-panelists said, "Oh, AI is great, and I could do so much with it, but where's the data?" So it was kind of a, where do you start? And I said, I'm from the telco industry, and we have heaps and heaps and tons of data. So it's not just about data. It's about, how you, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with your process automations? And then you want to work your way up? Do you want to start from data analytics and then take it into the next level of insights and then start adding layers to it to get to predictive kind of technologies? Do you want to experiment in the voice area? All of these separate technologies are all related to analytics and AI, are evolving in parallel. And they don't necessarily have to come together. So we are dabbling with several of these, and several of these are very real today.
Radha, your view on that, you agree with that?
Yeah, so in fact, as we go forward, firstly, indeed, telecom network is carrying a lot of user data. It is acting as pipeline for carrying user data. But aside to user data, telecom network itself generates vast data, which we call as control plane data, management plane data. And this data contains a lot of insight. So we already use this data to basically do a lot of things in an automatic fashion, such as self-organizing network or customer experience management system. And going forward, I think that AI and machine learning will form the brain system of a digitally transformed network. We are already working on some of the very advanced use cases to basically improve the operational efficiency of the network. I mentioned about massive MIMO. So massive MIMO itself is a very complex solution. So how to optimize the massive MIMO? So we are working out certain AI algorithms which can automatically optimize the coverage pattern of massive MIMO. Another example is we are doing some virtual gridding for maximizing the performance of carrier aggregation. Third example is we are basically taking the crowdsourcing mechanism to improve the location accuracy of IoT devices. Also, we are working on certain algorithms to optimize voltage performance. So these are some of the key use cases for AI and machine learning when it comes to operational and process improvement. But over and above that, I would also like to say that AI is applicable in other aspects of the network also. For example, we are applying AI into SDN also. And we are adding AI to it basically to bridge the gap between what business needs. And that is how we are basically evolving it to intent-driven networking, which will basically be able to improve customer experience and add business value as we go into SDN and NFV and the new technologies. So indeed, AI and ML will basically act as the brain system as we go into the next generation of networks.
Great. So I think we pretty much don't have any time for questions, but I'm sure the panelists will be available. Maybe you can speak to them directly. But thank you all very much. I think this was a very interesting panel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you.